Welcome to the San Jose Hockey Now podcast. I'm Sheng Peng, editor-in-chief of San Jose Hockey Now. You can also find me on Twitter at Sheng_Peng, and my work also at MEC Sharks.
And I'm Keegan McNally. You can find me on Twitter at halfwall_hockey, at my website, half-wallhockey.com, or at San Jose Hockey Now. This week, Sheng, what's the topic of the day?
Why are the Sharks so easy to play against? I'm going to kind of do a little bit of a deep dive on it. It's really stunning if you look at some of the under the hood stats of the Sharks this season compared to last year. Last year when they were at least mediocre but competitive, whereas this year it's pretty ugly across the board.
Yeah. And before we get to why are the Sharks so easy to play against, we had a pretty light week in terms of Sharks games. We have 2 games to talk about, which will also include some spotlights on some players like Anthony Duclair and Kevin Labanc, some quotes about Quinn and Labanc. We're going to talk about some trade deadline rumors. And then finally, before we get to the main topic of the day, we also have a interesting I guess rebuttal is a good way to put it, about a quote from Frank Seravalli and Jason Gregor on their DFO Rundown podcast about the Sharks and how we see the Sharks compared to how they see the Sharks currently.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a rebuttal, more that I investigated some of their claims, and we'll get more into it. But among them are that some Sharks players feel like they aren't even playing for an NHL franchise, and that there are stories about a lack of preparation and stuff like that. And so I dug into that a bit more. And I also wanted to go back to don't have quotes from Quinn and Labanc, but I'm saving that for a story. But I want to talk a little bit about their relationship. So that's what we're going to get at.
Sure. You're keeping it close to the vest, I guess, on those.
Oh, until the story is out. So
see, there's the spoiler. There's the hook to get you to subscribe to San Jose Hockey Now. Let's talk about the 2 games this week, which is a pretty light week after also being off for like 2 weeks. The Sharks only had 2 games. They lost both to Vegas and Nashville. What did you want to talk about with Anthony Duclair first? I guess is a good way to start this off.
Well, I like how he's been playing since the break, and so he's playing his best at the right time. You just see, feels like he has a bit more jump, but he's basically using his A skill, which is his skating, and he's just using it to impact games. So this is going to help the Sharks cause. It's talking with people, and I'm going to get more into with the trade deadline stuff. But Duclair is sort of the of the pending UFAs, besides Kakinen, he's the most attractive Shark, I think, among the pending UFAs once again. And I think he's kind of showing why that teams have their eye on him, that even though he hasn't been as productive, that speed is a very tangible asset that teams see and want. And also, too, Duclair obviously was on the Panthers team last year that made it to the finals. So he has sort of that pedigree, or that sort of we can put him into a good lineup and he can help us win.
The pedigree part is important. We'll when we get to the trade deadline, we'll talk about it. But I think that's going to be a big factor of why he could be one of the first names traded. It seems like he's a likely person.
One
to
of
be
the
traded.
top names. Yep.
Yeah, from the Sharks at least. Yeah, he did look good. He had a lot of speed. There was a couple plays that I remember watching where the speed was highlighted and he tried to get around like 2 defenders and go around them, and it just reminded me that he actually has that speed there when he kicks it into full gear. And I don't know, I honestly think people always see like, oh, we can trade on him, and well, I think honestly, if Duclair got to the right team, I think he would do well. That's the other bit is
yeah, I think
GMs are thinking it.
Yes, yeah.
There's a belief that he could do well, and honestly, I think so. It's just right now on the Sharks, it hasn't been falling for him, is a good way to put it.
Yeah, I see a little more will to attack the net too, I think. And so anyway, I think all that's combining to much more intriguing player than we were talking about a month ago.
For sure. And speaking of I don't know how to do the segue. Is this player much more intriguing than a month ago? Probably not. Actually, probably less intriguing is Kevin Labanc's current journey with the Sharks. Just let's talk a little bit about that before we get to the trade deadline stuff.
Well, yeah, Labanc was a bit of a late scratch for
Hmm.
the Nashville game. David Quinn had said the day before that he was going to play, and then he wasn't going to play, and I was a little bit of a surprise. And anyway, um, it's something that I'm working on. Uh, that uh, that yeah, like I
Hmm.
can't give it all, but there is something there. I would say between Labanc and a Quinn, it's not good. It's not. I don't think it's a good relationship, and I will leave it at that for now. While I kind of work on the story, but I mean, I think people can read between the lines. I mean,
Yeah.
we've kind of even last year they were both kind of talking about not being on the same page, but suffice to say, they did not get on the same page over the summer or in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah. It's come to a this whole Labanc Quinn Sharks situation. It's been a year and a half in the making, I think, or even longer. Who knows? But it really feels like something's got to give, and it may not give till the off season, to be
Hmm.
honest, because we've thought about the different scenarios to get Kevin to a different team, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen with his current contract.
Yeah.
But you know, whether or not Grier can work some kind of magic, I don't know. But I really want to see him on a different team. It's a similar thought to a lot of the Sharks players that are still kind of young or still kind of got some talent. I want to see them play for a team that actually is good, and see what they can do. Because Kevin has been
Yeah.
a few years from that.
Well, I'll speak up for Kevin there a little bit. I think he was very good at times last year when he was
Yeah,
playing with Hurdle and Meyer. Even actually before that, I remember he had a very nice stretch with Couture and Evander Kane a couple years ago.
sure.
So there's still some good hockey in there. I think I mentioned this on various podcasts or I've written it that I can see him having a Stefan Nason track.
Hmm.
Basically, a team signs him to a minimum and they use him as kind of a power play specialist and play him maybe 12, 13 minutes a night, but they're giving him minutes where he can produce and with line mates that he can produce with. And I can see something happening there. He can be a very, one of those kind of very important players in the cap era, a guy that really outproduces his cap hit. And unfortunately, I don't know if his game is well rounded enough to justify a much larger contract. But he can help you, though. He can help you in situations for sure. And I think he is still good enough to do that.
I agree. I mean, I it's kind of a belief, right? Because you don't see it all the time with the Sharks, at least not anymore. You did last year, maybe, but it's kind of just believing that he's still young enough that there's still something there with another team. But I look forward to that article that you're going to put out on Labanc and Quinn's relationship because that's interesting for sure. Let's move on. Let's go to the trade deadline. This is this thing that everybody wants to talk about because we're like 11 days away, maybe 12 days, something like that, from the NHL trade deadline. And the Sharks will probably be pretty active, I would say, or it's expected for them to be active. But what are the current rumors? What are the current thoughts from all the other media outlets about where the Sharks are going to go?
Well, once again, I had to tease you guys a little bit, tickle your ass with the feather
More.
a little bit here. So I have a lot of stuff coming out on it. I've talked with a lot of people. A few broad strokes that I can share, and we've seen some of this. TSN just did their top 50 trade bait targets, and
Mm-hmm.
Duclair was right on top for the Sharks. I think he went 20th.
Yep.
I think Granlund was 25th. Kakinen was 37th and Barabanov was 45th. I would throw in a Sturm there as being a candidate too, and a Ferraro too that we've talked about. I'm not so sure about a Hoffman or a Labanc, but anyway, so Declare is in the discussions I've had with people. He's a guy that he's still valued around the league, which I just alluded to when we talked about Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Granlund, I think, is an interesting case where obviously it's just how you see that extra year of his contract. Do you like it or not? I think for some teams, maybe having him locked in at $5 million next year, that's a plus. For other teams, though, it's like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to commit that much to him. So I would say that if he was on an expiring contract, then he would shoot up the kind of the trade baits list or trade target list. He'd be very, very in demand if he was on an expiring contract, which makes you think maybe the Sharks should hold him for another year and see if he can repeat his success, and then maybe you can get a bit higher of a price for a Granlund. Kakinen having a very good season for a very bad team, and a lot of teams need some kind of goaltending help insurance, and so he's going to be a perfect fit somewhere. I got to dig back on. I don't believe on Granlund that he's actively being shopped, I'll say. But Kakinen, I got to check in on that one. And finally, with Barabanov. Barabanov, of course, was scratched also. Scratched against Vegas. I think he came back with a pretty strong game against Nashville, but not, I think it's a different thing. I think when I talk with people about a Duclair versus a Barabanov, for one thing, Barabanov doesn't have that tangible kind of asset like Duclair has in his speed. Barabanov's speed is more crafty. I think it's harder to fit into your lineup. You also kind of don't know where you put a guy like that. Like, again, you got to find the right guys to play with him. And I think the other part about Barabanov too is that there's no sense of how he'll handle playoff kind of grind, pressure, tight checking, all that kind of stuff, right? Whereas we got to see that with Duclair last year. So even though Barabanov did have a nice track record before this year of production, and like I've said this many times about him, I don't think people buy into him as sort of a playoff winning winger. Whereas Duclair, there's enough of that he's going to go for maybe more than his production might suggest. But Barabanov, I don't think will. But I think, though, that some team might like him as sort of a depth guy, a guy that if there's injuries, that sort of thing can help out.
Yeah, I see him as kind of like a bubble team's like Hail Mary throw. Like
that's a good call. Yeah,
like you're not obviously going to be like the top teams, right? So they need players that they know are going to slot into whatever lineup, right? But you're kind of in that middle thing where maybe you can make a run if you've got the right mix, or you get hot and you put Barabanov in there and somehow he clicks with X, Y, and Z players, and suddenly you have a good second line that you didn't have before, kind of thing. And it's possible in that thing. I feel like that's the kind of thing he'll go for, is a Hail Mary throw for a team. He is still expensive too. Like $2.5 million for a Hail Mary throw is kind of like, it's not 750 or whatever. So
but it's not 4.75.
It's also not 5 million.
Kevin Labanc or 4.5 Mike Hoffman.
Yeah,
I just want to add
sure.
about Barabanov too. That it was suggested to me too that he might be sort of for a very good team instead of a kind of a bubble team, but for a very good team, he could also be a kind of a 13th guy, or even though his game's not ideal for a fourth line, but he's a guy that you can kind of slide in there, and if there's injuries or whatnot, he can play up. He has shown that he can play up. But again, though, yeah, if you were talking about value, I do think the TSN list looks pretty accurate to what I've been hearing. In terms of all those four guys on the list, in terms of what the Sharks might expect back in value too.
So we have Nico Sturm on there, right? Is what you're saying?
No, Sturm's not on that list.
So
but Sturm is one that I'm working on myself. That I do think there's an interest in a player like him. But no, it's the TSN's list. It was released February 21st. Duclair was 20th in the top 50. Granlund was 25th. He is a center. Kakinen was 37th. I think he's the fourth highest goalie on that list. And Barabanov was 45th.
So if I had to get you on record, how many of those players do you think are traded out of the four? Not
three
who they are.
Three of the four. I think Granlund. I don't know if they get an offer good enough to trade him. This is my guess. So
okay. All right. Well, I think it'll be a active trade deadline regardless for them.
Yeah, I don't think they want to trade him. You guys probably saw the story that I wrote about David Quinn and how much he loves Granlund, and he says, if you want him, you better pay up, which is kind of unusual for a coach to say. But
Sure.
one commenter on Twitter wrote, I forget the name of the tweeter, but said that never seen David Quinn defend a player or speak so highly of a player. I'm not sure if that's true, but definitely though,
Sure.
Quinn really loves Granlund, and again, mentioned it in the story that this guy is 5-6 months on the team, and he already got an alternate captain, with Hertl and Couture going out. So I think that speaks a lot. It's not just lip service there.
Yeah, and if we wind the clocks back like 8 months or whatever, the overwhelming consensus was that Granlund was the throwaway in that Carlson trade. He's
one
the
of them.
captain.
Well, one of the many throwaways.
Yeah, one of the many, but like the one that's like 5 million times 2 years rather than like Hoffman's 1 year or whatever, or Ruta like 2.5 times 2 or 2.7. So it's like he's the big money in that trade, right? And he's putting up points.
Let's. I mean, we predicted good things out of him after seeing him in training camp. So I wanted to.
I meant the world at large, the NHL world at large. That was the prevailing thing. Was he's the captain? Right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, Pittsburgh fans, I think like hundreds of them would have volunteered to drive him to the airport.
Yeah, because he had like 6 points in however many games since they traded for him.
They would have formed a human bridge so he could walk to the airport from his home in Pittsburgh to the airport.
So it's interesting to go. You can go from zero to hero in NHL, franchises like that.
Look at Erik Karlsson from the year before to last year. So
yeah, basically it's you never really know, and Granlund clearly has the skill. He just needed to be in the right environment. Mm-hmm. Somehow the Sharks are the right environment, which is interesting. I don't know how that works, but yeah, my prediction is I don't think Sturm, Ferraro, or Granlund are going to be traded. I just don't see it. I think I don't.
Oh yeah, those guys are on. Two of those guys are on the list, but I tend to agree on that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be those because they've all been kind of mentioned, possibly traded, or like in the rumors kind of thing.
Yeah, they're good players. They play important positions to center and defense. So there's going to be some smoke around them, but
I just don't see it. I think that Grier wants to keep them, like the way that they've been competing.
I think too that again, I think that I don't know if they're good enough that you get the overpayment. I think that's if I were to guess, I think that's what Grier is waiting on. That a team gets desperate, like Ron Hextall last year, sending a second for Granlund. But yeah, I don't know if that's gonna happen.
Yeah. Let's go into our third topic. Our third topic is Frank Seravalli and Jason Gregor. Frank Seravalli is of Daily Faceoff, very well known NHL insider. I guess is the best way to put it. They had an interesting quote. This was actually sent to us on Twitter, and I honestly should have wrote this down before. Who sent it to us on Twitter? Did you write it down?
No, I didn't. I saw it. I think someone actually on San Jose Hockey Now, Don V. Commented with a link. So
I see.
a Reddit link. And so anyway, it was on the February 19th episode of the DFO Rundown Podcast at about the 41 minute mark. And the couple of the key quotes, they talk about the Sharks for about 7 minutes. But I think the sort of the juicy or the stuff that we hadn't heard before was in these two quotes. And it was a conversation between Frank and Jason. And Frank says, and I quote, "I can only tell you from talking to players on that Sharks roster this season how miserable it's been for them. And it's not just because of the losing. They feel like they aren't even playing on an NHL franchise with the things happening around them." And Jason responds, you won't get an argument out of me. I've heard some ridiculous stories about lack of preparation and stuff that's not ideal at all."
And then the podcast kind of like fades out and goes to another segment.
Yeah, you move on to another topic. So.
They basically like drop this like I don't know what the way to put it. Just this like non-substantiated, this like I don't know. It's hard to nail down any specifics about the quote, and then they just move on. And this was after they spent like 10 minutes ripping into the Sharks in terms of their rebuild plans and how shitty it is, which is not a new thing. We've actually been talking about that regards to Frank on a different segment that he did with a different podcast where he just kind of ripped into Mike Grier's GMing. And we
Oh yeah,
decided not
that was a
to.
Canucks Army one, right?
Yeah, Canucks Army. We decided not to actually respond to that one because it was like we didn't feel like it was in depth enough or nuanced of a discussion enough.
Yeah, if you do want to find out one, and I think I did link to it on one of my my daily
Sure.
SJHN daily link. Even if I don't agree with something, if it's from a big name like Frank, it's still
We'll put
worth
it out there.
listening to. And so yeah. So anyway, we didn't respond to it. I think if you listen back to it, the one thing that I think is missing, just a big hole in sort of his argument, was he omits the Timo Meier trade, which the Sharks I don't think necessarily had to make, and they could have signed him a la
Sure.
Thomas Hertl or tried to.
Mhm.
And I know there's some conflicting reports of whether or not the Sharks tried to, but I believe that the last word on it is from Claude Lemieux telling the Mercury News that no, the Sharks never made a kind of significant offer to a Meyer. So I'm gonna go
Sure.
with that one as the most likely, and that's the sense I got throughout the whole time last year too. That kind of never materialized. And I think Kevin Weeks may have said that Sharks did make a significant offer. But anyway,
Yeah.
I think most people that I've seen believe that is not the case. But anyway, though, going back to what Frank said on the Canucks Army podcast, yeah, that's a pretty big indication of a team that is trying to rebuild. Ever so slowly, but
For sure.
they're saddled with some contracts. They only have 3 retention spots, right? 2 of the 3 being used already by Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns. But anyway, so
Right.
on to though this most recent salvo.
I have one more
Yes.
thing to say about the Canucks Army one because I want to get the, and it's not to bring this thing down, but at the time he basically said that he almost acted incredulous that the Sharks only got a first round pick for 100-point defenseman in Erik Karlsson, and he said that was basically not good enough at the time when he made this podcast a couple weeks ago. But when the entire summer he put out article after article about how no team was offering anything for Erik Karlsson, they would have to give him away or get something if they retained 50%. That was his articles over and over and over again in the summer.
Well,
So
and that argument was more accurate than I don't remember that part of the Canucks Army thing, but
he says
that,
he just said like they got a first round pick for
right.
a 100-point defenseman, and he was like trying to insinuate that was not good enough. And
Right,
I
and
just
I'm sure people have told Frank that, but like in terms of what he wrote before over the summer, that actually was more accurate.
Sure.
That on a straight deal, the team taking
So
on
they got more than that. I mean,
well, no, but again,
we just talked about.
you can't ignore the cap dumps they took on.
Of
Granlund,
course,
what nobody wanted at the
it
time.
was smart
Hoffman
GMing,
and
is what it
Rublev.
was.
Yeah.
It was smart. It was like taking a washed asset that you know that NHL GMs are not going to give you for, and then turning it into probably a top 15 pick. Like, regardless of whether or not you took on Hoffman for a year, who gives a shit? Ruda for 2 years, who gives a shit? Hoffman or Granlund, who's actually one of your best players. Like, it was good GMing. It was all it was, and Frank gave zero credit to him. Anyway, that's my end part about it. Is he gave zero credit for that actual good GMing bit, and he ignored the Timo Meier bit of it. Zero credit.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. I still think, again, we talked about this, so we don't need to get.
I'm not
into
giving
it,
him any kind of. I'm not giving him any kind of a pass for this because it.
Oh, I'm not talking about Frank. I'm talking about the
Yeah.
deal. I don't care about. I mean, Frank can have his opinion, or his sources can have their opinions. But but yeah, the retention bit of the Karlsson thing, I still wonder about, and we'll see in a couple of years with the extra money that they saved, or the extra cap, because they obviously incurred cap equivalent
I don't know.
taking on
If he was
Hoffman,
taking on
Ruda, and
half of the
Gremley.
contract, that's all that Frank would be talking about is how they're still retaining $5.5 million
I
on
don't.
Erik Karlsson.
Yeah, I don't want to put words into
Sure.
Frank's mouth in terms of what he would say in this situation or that situation,
Right.
but yeah, I'm not gonna say that the Carlson trade, in my opinion, was incredible GMing, but
It was
all
good.
things considered, actually the more important part of it was that Grier and Quinn got Carlson into turn Carlson back into a movable asset, which I think
Yes.
that's the miracle. It's not the GMing or the trade, but
It was the
it
play of
was
Erik Karlsson
a play of Gar, but as helped though
by Quinn.
by Quinn and Grier. So I
Sure.
think they put a situation that um that made it that helped it was conducive to Eric
Mhm.
having come not maybe no one would have I don't think anyone would have projected a 100-point season, but to have the season that he had. So anyway, but
But you're right. We should. I want to separate my opinion of Frank's opinion from what he said about this next thing, because this is something that's not like his opinion on how Mike Grier is doing. This is opinion on like the Sharks as a organization currently. So I
well,
think we should dig into it.
it's more than just opinion too. It's something that he says that he's
Hmm.
getting from players,
For sure.
uh, and he specified as players on the current roster too. And I think it's worth noting too that Jason Gregor, as you can guess, and a lot of you know that he is Noel Gregor's uncle. So
Okay.
it's these things aren't coming from nowhere. So I'll say that for them. I don't
Okay.
think Frank or Jason are making anything up. But anyway, so I spent some time with this, and I'm not like still working on it. If I hear anything different, I'll let you guys know. But I talked with current Sharks players or people very closely associated to them, and this is not what they've said. What Frank and Jason said is not something that everybody feels on the Sharks, and I don't doubt that there are very, very unhappy players on the Sharks. If you remember last year, there were stories about discord between Noel Gregor and Quinn. The Sharks this year, they've got 15 wins, and
Hmm.
some players have been scratched or aren't playing as much as they're used to, and players that aren't used to being scratched have been scratched. So it wouldn't surprise me if there are players who have talked to Frank and are unhappy.
Makes
But
sense.
yeah, but and I'm still working on but I've had a number of conversations, and I don't see this as a team wide thing though. And I think that's the thing I want to check, because when you say not being run like an NHL franchise, is this the Arizona Coyotes again, from a few years ago? Is this I don't know, to name your dysfunctional franchise, the LA Clippers under Donald Sterling, whatever, right? Is that what's going on here, right? And that's not the sense that I'm getting. That the Sharks are being run like the Charleston Chiefs
Sure.
or something like that. Now I want to be careful that I'm not trying to paint a sunshine and rainbows picture of the Sharks. Again, they are a 15-win team. They are we're gonna get to it. Why are they so easy to play against? And you look at we're gonna show you some stats. It's mind blowing. Just the lack of resistance from this team in a lot of ways. But and they're playing hard too, and that's I want to add that too. They're playing hard, but it's just a very poorly constructed roster. So I'll put it nicely. So anyway,
Sure.
I'm not trying to paint the sunshine rainbows picture. I'm not trying to shield David Quinn or Mike Grier. I'll tell you, and I don't want people to run away with this, because I want to make clear that this is just one source telling me a couple of these things, right? And that they're single opinions, that this is not a mass opinion, right? From people I've talked to. And this is also too the key of what I want to look into with what Frank and Jason said. Is this some kind of team wide thing? Are the Sharks
Sure.
are the Sharks has Hasselplattner become the Donald Sterling or whatever? I mean, I'm
Yeah,
not
are they giving
you
them
know what I mean though.
are they
Like
giving them like socks with holes in it? Are they
right,
like giving
right,
them dull skate blades and stuff?
right,
Like, is
right,
that what's
right,
going on, or is it
right,
like
right.
to do
The
defendings.
Sharks introduced neck guards, and they're just socks, So
Yeah,
right.
something like that.
So yeah.
They're feeding
But
them gruel every night,
right,
basically.
right, right. Um, so one source told me that he believes that not only is Grier overmatched, and
Hmm.
we've talked a lot about Grier's experience, but he also didn't surround himself with the right people. Another told me, quite frankly, that he thought that Quinn should get canned at the end of this year. But the reason why I'm not running with it and making a story about it is because these are all single opinions, right?
Sure.
And there are also sources that I've talked to who staunchly defend both Grier and Quinn. And so I want to kind of emphasize that point of it that this is not like a groundswell opinion on either of those things, on Grier or Quinn. And also too that I'm not trying to defend, I'm not trying to paint this picture of the Sharks that isn't true either, that everything's hunky dory, because it's not. I had to watch this every night, and I don't like what I'm watching. Exhausted watching bad hockey. I really miss
Hmm.
watching good hockey. But anyway, though, going back to what Frank and Jason said, I'd be curious about specifics. So specifics about why the Sharks aren't acting like an NHL franchise, or how they're not preparing their players, and maybe that's coming. And to give Frank his due, he's the one that called the Evander Kane thing with the Sharks like months and months before anybody else was on that. So I don't doubt once again that there are unhappy players on the Sharks right now.
Sure.
But is this story beyond that? Beyond some malcontents? Again, understandable malcontents for various reasons. Is there more to it? I don't know. So I would like to hear specifics, and maybe that's coming. And so when that comes, then I'll address that as when that comes. But right now, though, I haven't seen or heard those specifics from people I've talked to.
Sure.
Um, and yeah, it's just not it's not it's this is overall it's not something that I think is sort of a team wide sense of this.
That's and honestly, when I heard the quote, like when I watched it, and it was actually 77 loafers on Twitter who asked us to look into this. So if you're listening, we were looking into it. But I heard the quote. I was like, Sheng has been around NHL locker rooms, not in them, but around them or near them, or talked to players for years, like years and years and years and years. Is there anything specific about this team that would, in your opinion, this is just your opinion, not a source,
Mhm.
like lead credence to
Okay.
that quote? That's what I wanted to ask was like, you've been around teams for years. Is
Mhm.
there, other than this being like a historically bad Sharks team, is there anything like that from your opinion?
Well, Frank and Jason have been around rooms for years, more
Sure.
than more than I have, to be honest. But I mean, I think there's something to it, but whether or not it's something like huge
Yeah.
or scandalous, I guess, to that level, because what they said kind of suggests that it could be, and that's why I dug into it more.
Yeah.
But I'm not seeing that kind of level of it. And just to give a kind of comparison, right? We kind of went through this exercise last during the summer when
Hmm.
there were accusations about the Barracuda, how they're treating their players, player wise, players being unhappy, right? And there was substance to it, right? But was it did it rise to sort of the level of scandal?
Sure.
I don't think so. There's things I've heard that like I can I'm being a little oblique here, but like there are things I've heard that player is unhappy about, right?
Hmm.
That okay, I heard what he was unhappy about, and then I checked with other former players, other like non-Sharks related entities, right, just to see like does this guy have a legitimate gripe?
Sure.
And what I got back was, well, no, not necessarily. Like I can see why this guy was unhappy, but it's not like again, it's not scandalous though what was done.
Yeah.
And so again, I'm being very oblique about it for a reason. But the point of it is that like a player
Hmm.
can be very unhappy about something, but it doesn't mean that necessarily that that most of the Sharks players or most of the front office feels like they're running a Mickey Mouse franchise or a minor league franchise masquerading as, or anything like that aren't, So again, like I think that more specifics I think are necessary to really to see. I'm not ruling it out. I'm not ruling out what
Sure.
they said. They have their sources. I'm sure I'm sure this is what they were told. But and on my side, once again, I did not uncover. I wasn't trying to. I was trying to see if there was legit,
Yeah.
if there was specifics to it, and
Sure.
I haven't found those specifics myself. And when I found them, then you guys will know because I'll write it or I'll tell you. But
Yeah.
yeah, I have not seen any specifics that tell me that. Again, I gave you that example, that very oblique example where again I was told something a player wasn't happy about, and I checked around, and yeah, it might be a reason for a player to be unhappy, but it's not worth,
Uncommon.
it's not, yeah, it's not worth a expose story. It's not that scandalous in the end, So
I do wonder about one of your sources mentioning like who Grier surrounds him with, or who's Grier's staff currently, because if there are a lot of inexperienced people in terms of management, like there's something to be said about you don't know what you don't know, right? Like you don't know what's wrong if you haven't been around certain situations enough to know that it's wrong, right? So I do wonder if there could be some of that happening where like, oh, we didn't know we had to do X, Y, and Z for whatever because they've never been in that situation before. I mean, we're going to talk about this in a bit when we get to our main segment, which is why are the Sharks easier to play against this year. But I don't know. There's just been a lot of dumping on the Sharks for being really bad when it's like we knew the Sharks were going to be really bad, and I don't know why that is happening. Other than the Sharks are very bad and Grier is very new, so it's probably easy to dump on the new guy who's bad.
it's possible. It could be an easy target situation. Also, to the construction of the Sharks roster,
Hmm.
I've asked Quinn about this. So many guys free agents. It's just a weird kind
Sure.
of mismatch of a roster in terms of just goals. I guess I think it's a team even at the beginning of the season before all the losing that it seems hard to kind of get this team kind of together. United on one goal. I know that's coach's job, but it's hard because there's so many differing agendas, and then you don't win. You don't have that kind of unifying factor where players shut up or players like are okay. It's fine. I'm not playing as much as I want, but hey, we're winning, so I get it. Right?
Sure.
You don't have that, and then
Sure.
people start worrying about their own agendas. Like, where am I going to play next year? I'm not getting this power play time, so they're in off season. I'm not gonna make my nut and all this kind of stuff, right? And so I'm just there's your human nature things too. So I'm not even necessarily like blaming players. Like, I'm not saying players should be like, oh, all for one. Yeah, all for one. I'm happy to get scratched and go from an NHL contract to a two-way contract next year. I'm not suggesting that either.
Hmm.
But it's a hard situation, I guess, for players, for coaching staff, for management, and it's a hard situation. And I think that some of those things, some of those challenges that you face when you kind of when you have all these differing forces with kind of different goals, basically start conflicting with each other. So
Yeah. Um. Yeah. I don't. I also want to stress that all of my opinions about Frank's quotes are all from me, not from you. Because just to separate our two opinions. Um, you have to live and breathe this world every day. I don't, but
well, again, I give Frank a lot of credit. And I mentioned the
yeah,
Vander Kane thing. We all know the expansion draft thing.
for sure. He has
I can even
sources,
say I
for sure.
can't say too far, but I wouldn't. I'll just say I wouldn't just throw Frank under the bus about the Labanc waiver stuff, which I know a lot of Sharks fans do. So I can't say much more than that, but I wouldn't just do that.
Sure.
So,
And I was on that team of like, this seems
well, I was
strange.
too. Because
Mhm.
it did seem strange, but though.
Yeah.
All that said, though, if he says what he says, but there's no specifics, and so I need to dig into it, I dig into it, and I find what I find.
Yeah.
And again, maybe there's some expose article coming out over the summer. I look forward to it, I guess, because it's going to be exciting. There's going to be a lot of juicy
Yeah.
bits. It's going to be some good reading, and I'll also kick myself for missing it all. And you guys can remind me that I missed it all if that indeed happens, but. Again, right now, from what I'm seeing, and again talking to people, I just don't see it as more than okay. There are players who are unhappy, which of course the team sucks, and like I said, yeah, like not
Bunch of
everyone's
dudes are on
getting
expiring
yeah,
contracts
just a
and
lot going on there. Yeah, so
for sure.
yeah, but and
All
we'll
right.
see. Even with the Barracuda stuff, right? Where I parsed out what was said, and to give credit to the original source, that was JD Locked On Sharks, his podcast, right? But talk with other people, right? Other AHL people, and what were the Barracuda doing something egregious, scandalous, whatever? And I came back with no, they weren't. And so
Yeah.
this is where I'm at right now with this stuff too, until I hear something different from my sources.
Love it. That's journalism, and I commend you for it.
Yeah.
Um, let's move on to our final topic of the day. This is we should put it in big bold letters. Why are the Sharks so easy to play against this year, comparatively to last year? I think is what the subtext should be compared to
Yes.
last year.
And I want to start this discussion, and it's going to be a kind of a lengthy one. It's not as easy as you might think it is. The Sharks
Mhm.
suck. That's why they're easy to play against, Sheng.
Hey, they're bad.
But this is what Mike wants eventually, right? And
Mhm.
I know that he knows, and I know, and you know that they're not there yet. But this is what Mike said at the State of the Sharks last month, and the quote is. I think for me, and he was asked by Dan Ruzanowski what sort of his ideal Sharks roster is. And Mike said, I think for me, it's what I talked about from day one, which he has talked about since he was announced as a Sharks GM. It's to be fast, competitive, in your face, hard to play against.
Hmm.
We're kind of chipping away at that. We're not there yet, obviously. We still need to get a little bit bigger. We still need to get a little bit faster, be harder to play against, get more competitive. And so,
Mhm.
anyway, that phrase, hard to play against, I know you guys are tired of hearing that. That's hockey cliche 101. But I think that's sort of the catch all for everything that Mike is saying size, speed, all that kind of stuff, competitiveness. It's just all catch on to being hard to play against. And so,
Mhm.
anyway, somehow the Sharks have gone from being mediocre, being somewhat challenging to play against last year, to being paper thin, easy to play against this season.
Sure, that's a good way to
And
put it.
we have some numbers just to give you guys kind of a side by side of sort
Sure.
of what's going on under the hood here.
Yep.
So here we have from SportLogiq, we have a side-by-side comparison of where the Sharks were in February 2023. This was the game right before they traded Timo Meyer, and where the Sharks were a couple of days ago before the Vegas game, February 2024.
Mhm.
And how to read this? And these are reports that I get that I pay for because I think it's important to be as informed as possible. But anyway, so how to read this is all situations, and this
Sure.
gives a snapshot of just a lot of areas, specific areas of offense and defense, as you can see. Now, I'm not going to focus, Mike. I'm not going to focus on the micro stats of everything here, like cycle chances and things like that, right? But what do you notice here, right? If you look at the NHL rank, right? You see how bad the Sharks were pretty mediocre last year. A lot of reds, which is bad. Not enough blues, which is good. But if you look at the Sharks from 2023 to 2024, this is all red. This is all like blood red, almost blood red here. So
Yeah,
along the 2024 line, right? And the key stats that I wanted to look at is expected goals. And you look at just the difference here, right? That the Sharks last year expected goals at this point before the Timo Meier trade, they were 19th. In expected goals against, they were 21st. You look at what the Sharks are this season in that stat, expected goals for, they are dead last, and expected goals against, they are second to last.
yep,
And also, too, I think another way you can see in terms of just the key stats are quality chances or high danger chances, right? You can see that the Sharks last year, quality chances, they were 19th. And then quality chances against, they were 16th. So kind of middle of the road there. Whereas 2024, SportLogiq calls it high danger chances, but it's the same essential thing. You see that they are either dead last or second to last. Um, so it's a kind of a snapshot. We can leave this on for just a little bit, so you guys can kind of.
sure,
I'm not gonna run through every stat here, but you guys can kind of read it yourself. Once again, this is a comparison of the Sharks. It says on top February 2023 versus February 2024. But anyway, I think this kind of underscores what's going on with the Sharks now. Basically, the Sharks went from mediocre. And one thing you can see in the stats last year is that the Sharks had gotten better goaltending, that they would have played themselves out of the Connor Bedard / Will Smith race.
for sure.
And but this year, though, they are very, very, very deserving of being at the top of the running for Macklin Celebrini,
Hundred percent.
along with the Blackhawks. But anyway, the Sharks went from mediocre to one of the worst teams of the cap era, and so what happened? And there's some obvious things that happened here, and let's get them out of the way.
Sure,
We didn't miss them, but obviously there are the trades, right? Different player personnel. Eric Carlson is a different kind of hard to play against, at least offensively, right? He's not the traditional hard to play against puck battle guy, right? But obviously he puts so much pressure on the other team that he helps you offensively, which clearly he did.
sure,
Timo Meier is a load. He is the definition of hard to play against, and obviously with a lot of skill too. Losing the likes of a Matt Nieto, Nick Bonino, Steven Lawrence, that all counts for something too, because I think they all contributed to making the Sharks more difficult to play against last year.
hmm
The other bit of it too is the Sharks this season, they've lost two of their more high compete players in Logan Couture and Matt Benning for most of the season. And also too, losing Tomas Hertl, that hurts you also in this regard. And so obviously these two things that I mentioned, the player personnel changes, the injuries, these are not things that I put on Mike Grier or David Quinn.
yeah,
Um, these two reasons, these are two reasons why the Sharks are easier to play against. But again, you can't put this on them. Like they had to trade Eric Carlson. They were running in circles with a player like that, right? Timo Meier too. They're running in circles. Everyone wanted to rebuild. So this is what a rebuild looks like.
yep.
But this is a little too ugly. This is a little too real. This is a little too graphic. Look at all the blood on the right side, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
it's a
have
little.
one stat that's not red. One.
Yeah, it's
That's rebound chances,
a
apparently.
bit of a splatter fest on
Oh,
the right side, the 2024 stats. So anyway, though, yeah. So this is a little too real, right? A little too real of a rebuild. Um, but okay, so here's the one thing I wonder about, and this is kind of came to a head a couple days ago after the Sharks lost to the Golden Knights, and David Quinn said some stuff that I think did, some fans liked, some didn't like. I think that it's ultimately or it was misunderstood by a lot of people, though I think, and so I'm gonna get on that in a little bit, but. Here's, I guess, I would say the one area where I think the Sharks really can improve on this
Mhm.
offseason to at least make a more a competitive, bearable product to watch. The Sharks aren't going to make the playoffs next year. That's fine. The Sharks are
Sure.
going to be in contention for a top hit, a top pick. Is that it's going to be Higgins? Is he the
Yeah,
kind of
Hagen.
presumptive? Yeah,
Yeah.
Hagen. Yeah. So yeah. So that's great, and all that. But how you get there does matter, though, as we've seen this year, and just how much of a grind this is this year. And if you thought the Sharks were awful, you look at the SPORTLOGiQ stats, it supports all of it, that they are good at nothing except for goaltending, which I don't show here, but they are good at goaltending. That's
Yeah,
that's that's
better.
about all they've got. So um so if they had a goaltending from last year, the Sharks would have like 20 points this year. So
Yep.
anyway, though, so one thing that they can improve on, though, is I think last offseason, I think the Sharks acquired too many or over indexed on the same type of player. And I think they're trying to chase more draft capital, but they added Duclair and Hoffman, and you add that to Labanc and Barabanov, and that's four offense first, not necessarily hard to play against finesse players. And
For
I don't want
sure.
to. I'm not blaming it just on these guys, by the way. That's why I mentioned other parts, that they lost a lot of talent, obviously, and Eric and Timo, and they're missing two important pieces to the mix, the current mix, in Logan Couture and in Matt Benning and a Thomas Schertl too. Um, and so the other part of it too is that hindsight is super easy right now. The Anthony Duclair trade, Stephen Lawrence fifth round pick, that looked like a steal of a trade, to be honest. I think we all thought it was a steal of a trade. We all hoped that maybe with a bigger role that Duclair would really take off too. Hoffman was a necessary part, necessary evil to get that
For
first
sure.
round pick for Carlson. So let's not forget that before we kind of cast stones here. But though, in the end, though, what's happened this season, right? Instead of getting, I think, the most optimistic scenario, and that's what we were kind of thinking when we talked about the Sharks maybe eclipsing 70 points, was that somehow you might get 75 or so goals from these four wingers. Um, and anyway, you're not anywhere close to that, right?
Nope.
And only Declare has seemingly come through this season with sort of his value intact or his reputation intact, at least so far. Hoffman continues to decline. I think he hasn't scored in 27 games, which is the longest goalless streak of his career.
Wow.
And Labanc and Barabanov have gone backwards from last year. Huge, huge steps backwards,
Yeah,
both of
for
them.
sure.
And so all four of them are players that if they're not providing what they're supposed to be good at, which is offense, then they're not really giving you much else, right? Because again, they're not hard players. They're not hard players to play against in general, right? So if I were to think about one area where I would predict, and maybe I'm wrong, but that the Sharks will focus on this off season, that maybe they might have chased the draft capital too hard when they pursued these kind of players, and so instead, maybe they'll go after players that will make this a more bearable product to watch.
Maybe.
And I'm also thinking too, in relation to all these wingers I'm talking about, that there was also the Sharks' rumored pursuit of Tarasenko, who also again is one of those guys. If he's not scoring for you, I don't know what else he's doing for you. And I've also heard in addition that he's not necessarily a great room guy, and so that one was puzzling. It was understandable on the draft capital part, and of course the Sharks need scoring, but it was puzzling on terms of like how do you want to build a room and examples you want to set for your younger players, and if you really do want to build a hard to play against team, um, that I think adding Tarasenko to the mix was would have been questionable. So
Hmm.
to even pursue it, it sort of seems like a like your sort of your aims were a little bit off this past off season. And I'm talking specifically on the Mike Grier side here. And so anyway, so this all this leads to what Quinn said after the Vegas game a couple of days ago, a game where the Sharks lost 71% of puck battles in that game, according to SportLogiq.
It's
And
bad.
and actually, if you want to go back to let's go back to the SportLogiq stats,
Sure.
and I think one area that you can see that reflected the Sharks kind of being easy to play against, right? Look at the possession time, the zone possession time, right? And offensive possession time, the Sharks weren't great with that last year, even with Timo and Tommy. But look that they're even worse this year. They're dead lost this year. And I've written this many times. Sharks have nobody who can kill plays. Very few. Maybe Ferraro every once in a while. Some guys step in here and there. But look at the offensive zone possession time that they give up. And dear Lord, I didn't know it was that much of a difference. So last year, the Sharks were giving up 654 all situations.
Yep.
This year it's 911, 911.
Jeez.
So, I didn't realize it was that big a difference. But we watch the games, right? And when you watch the games, you see a Sharks team that is constantly just chasing the play all night long, right? And so the Sharks need to add, I think, or maybe need to focus on adding players that can kill plays and get the Sharks going on the other side. I know that skill matters. Let me get to this too. But if your skill, and no one will deny that in their heyday, right? Duclair, Hoffman, Labanc, these are all skilled players. But if they're not scoring, they're not helping you. And anyway, so this all leads to what David Quinn said after the Golden Knights game a few nights ago, and it's
Hmm.
all in a story I wrote about a week ago. Quinn says team needs more size, will, and Quinn said basically he was asked if puck battles were better tonight than in the last game,
Hmm.
and he said you got to keep in mind there is a big size disadvantage against that team. That's the Golden Knights. And when you're 180 and you go to the corner and you get someone 220, you give your all, he gives his all, you're going to lose.
Hmm.
But that being said, and this is Quinn still, we have a lot of areas of improvement where we can be harder regardless of our size. I'm touching on both sides of it. So I want to, yeah. So I'm gonna stop. I've stop with at that part of the Quinn quote. So it's not just about size. A lot of people jumped on and be, oh, the Sharks just want bigger players. Obviously not. They have Willie Macklin. They drafted Will Smith, and
Yeah.
so obviously that's not what they're the only thing that they're trying to add.
Yeah. And it's going to be hard to reconcile the two if that's. I don't think that's a. I don't know. I didn't jump down Quinn's throat on that quote because I feel like there are certain players that maybe they need to be bigger, but there's also dudes that are smaller that can still the will aspect can kind of come forward on that. And guys like William Eklund, yeah, they're small, but in general, he does, compete extremely hard.
Well,
And
Macau Grenland's a great example of that.
Granlund's a
David
great
Quinn
one.
loves Macau Grenland. It doesn't
Yeah,
matter if Macau Grenland's 5'11" or
sure.
6'11". So,
And
um,
I think there's not a quote to really jump at it, but there is a huge size there. And the Golden Knights are the classic example ever since they won the cup with like their 6'5" defensemen, right? Like that's just what they did, and it worked. And then NHL GMs have been talking about it ever since. In the draft too, like every year, it's like, oh, we got to get the guy who's 6'5" because the Golden Knights won with their 6'5" defenseman,
right,
and it's
and
like I don't think that's always the case, but yeah,
yeah, and we look at and it's in the same article, but the according to Elite Prospects, the Vegas indeed is the heaviest team in the league at 207 pounds on average, but
sure,
the Sharks actually are middle of the pack on the Elite Prospects list at 199 pounds. Under the Sharks, you have the Canucks, you have the Avalanche that weigh in on average at like 197, 195, something like that. And these are two of your better teams in the league. It's
yeah,
it's it's a mix of things, right? Ultimately, it's not about size or even skill. It's about will, right? It's about guys who want it, who are going to play a little bit harder. And
sure,
David Quinn mentions that. So the quote ends with, "There are too many instances when we go into these battles and we're not really into them.
hmm
80% into the battle and 20% into the puck. at that level, that's just not good enough. And Quinn has talked a lot about this year, that the Sharks players, one of their problems in general, team wide, is that they pursue the puck and they don't take the body first. And so that's kind of what Quinn is alluding to. Quinn has talked a lot about catching flesh, which is kind of a funny phrase, but I actually heard that he was talking about that at practice this past week. I heard him say that. And so don't worry about chasing the puck, just using your stick to wave at the puck. Use your body, get in there, battle with the guy, turn it into a 50-50 at least. So anyway, so what Quinn said there, if you look at the whole course of things, like I said, these three elements, right? The injuries, different personnel, and the kind of player that the Sharks kind of focused on this offseason to some degree, right? Lost some hard to play against players. Some got hurt. And then there's players you had in off season, and none of the players you had in off season are really great puck battle guys. I mean, Kyle Burrows and Giovanni Smith to some degree, but they're not big minute players, especially Smith. And so you didn't replace any of your puck battle guys, your Timos, your guys who are hurt like Logan, Tomas Hertl, even though your big Nick Menino's with anybody really, right? And so anyway, I expect the Sharks. This is not inside knowledge or anything. This is just my expectation based on what I'm watching this year and based on what Grier says he wants from his team, is that the Sharks will have an offseason more like Grier's first, where there was a focus more on compete guys like Sturm and Benning and Cunnin. And I think we saw that those guys did help, along with obviously the Sharks' great players last year, in terms of making the product bearable to watch on ice. So I know some of you will say, if you've listened to all of this, and it's the stuff that I read about or heard after I put out the article or put out Quinn's quotes. Of course, skill matters. But again, what I said, if your skill isn't scoring, it's not helping you. And that's what we've seen a lot of the Sharks this year, right? And big picture, it's not about the Sharks schooning up. No one is talking about that. So don't need to tweet that or say that, because that's just not true. It's about, I think, at least, it's about not embarrassing yourself out there, which is what the Sharks team is doing this season overall. Like, no one is saying get out of the rebuild or whatever, right? It's just putting out a product that is watchable. And I wrote an article, between skill and will and size. Of course, skill is the hardest ingredient to acquire. So you have to have patience with that. The Sharks aren't going to add a true first line, Nathan McKinnon, Mikko Rantanen. They're not going to trade for those two guys in off season, right? And so they are acquiring they're trying to, through the draft, through your Will Smiths and whatnots. You have William Eklund, you have Shakir Mukhamadullin also developing, but all that will take time to mature, right?
Yep.
And so in the meantime, I'm hoping that the Sharks just don't embarrass themselves. And so that's my hope. And so that's what I hope comes out of this off season, that we don't have to go through a season again, all the splatter fest on the SPORTLOGiQ stats. I don't know how to go through that again.
And to go through this and not win Macklin Celebrini will be heartbreaking.
Yes.
Yeah, you really hope that there's light at the end of this tunnel. And my final thing is just, I don't know. Yes, it seems like the Sharks have been bad for a long time, but this is Grier's middle of his second year. And I think they just need more time to actually execute some sort of rebuild here, rather than like just everybody, like, because we give so many other teams passes, right? Like, Anaheim, who has amazing prospects right now, has been bad for a while and are still bad.
Yeah, they're still bad. Yeah, I mean, I don't think
they're still bad.
Focus is paid on sort of like they've committed a lot of money.
Buffalo has been a shit team for a decade, and they're still bad. And like, the Sharks have been bad for 4 years now, almost 5 years now. And yeah, that sucks. But the first 3 of it, I'm not even counting. Like, they weren't dedicated to an actual plan, and I don't know, like it just give the Sharks a little bit more time, and I feel like they don't, because it's easy to kind of pick on Grier for being new.
Yeah,
Uh,
I do think to add to that Mike gets a lot of the flock for the last 3 years of Doug Wilson
when he
slash
wasn't
Joe
there.
Will when he wasn't there at all in any capacity, and I've said it before. I still think so that the big picture overall of rebuilding, focusing on that, I think they're doing a good job. A good job of that. I like that plan. I'm focused on one detail that I don't like that they did last year, and that I do put on Mike Grier that
Yeah,
yeah, maybe make sure that your team is a little harder to play against, a little more competitive to go into the season instead of what we got this year. But overall, though, yeah, I still think that the plan is fine. That they are rebuilding. That and they have at least admitted it to themselves that that's what they need to do.
yeah, and we give Chicago credit for getting Connor Bedard, and they traded for like Seth Jones. They gave up 2 first-round picks like 2 years ago,
Yeah,
and I don't know.
Anaheim's the one that still is kind of funny to me because and granted I'm being a little bit I'm kind of casting stones without investigating Anaheim hard enough. So I guess
Hmm.
I'll say that but I've wondered about how they're building things because they've given out a lot of contracts to players that Alex Killorn, 34 year. Why contracts like that, right? Ryan Strome.
Yeah,
You
trying to
know
get
these
some.
long term contracts, right? And that's I wonder about some of that because
Sure.
I think that is an area that I think that Greer has really stayed away from the last couple of years, and I think that's good. I think that if you're going to sign longer term guys, make sure that they don't hurt you on the cap and they're contributing at that kind of that rate.
Yeah,
And they have with their longer contracts, and they hit on Nico Sturm. I think Matt
sure.
Benning was good last year. Obviously, he got hurt, so I think we'll see what he brings next year. But his contract is so small that doesn't even matter. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, I like actually. I would say I like that part of it too. That Greer has pursued, and I look at Anaheim, and I don't know what they're doing in that regard. Why they think they need to do that? Yeah, at this point. So
Yeah. It's a mystery. Anyway, I too hope that the Sharks are more competitive next year, because there were definitely points this season when I was very lost in terms of
right.
my like wanting to watch this team. I was lost. Did not want to watch any game, and suffered through it like all of us did. So
Yeah, just realized. Yeah, we still have like 25 games left this season. So
I'm gonna lose every single one. That's what I want. Every single game. I want to feel lost by the end of it. That's what I
The
want,
Nashville
because
one was good though. That's the kind of game you want where they're in it, they're
yeah,
fighting, they're scoring.
players looked
Uh,
like they matched the role that they're supposed to be playing, and I liked
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I was
Players
like,
were
oh,
playing
this
hard.
looks,
Yeah,
yeah, this looks like a system of some kind. I like that.
yeah.
They didn't win, but it's still,
And that's fine too. Yeah, so
yeah,
that is the ultimate goal, right? So
they
I get that part of it, but there are again different ways to tank, different ways to rebuild. So
for sure.
so
All right, that's all we got for this week. We will be back next week with more Sharks games than that we had this week. Anything else
more
you,
trade deadline stuff. I'm
and more
sure.
trade?
So
I'm sure it's gonna ramp up in the next week.
there's got to be actual trade at some point. Yeah, we are 12 days away. Yeah, so yeah.
We got this. It's going to be great. We'll have all of your Sharks coverage during that time. So tune in. Subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. We're getting close to 1,000 subscribers. That's kind of our big goal for this year, is to get to 1,000. So do it. And yeah, anything else, Sang?
Nope, that's it for me.
All right. Have a good week, everybody. Bye.